Scenes of an ocean liner ablaze, drifting through the waters off the eastern seaboard of the United States and drifting to rest on a New Jersey shore to smolder, may seem like something straight out of a horror movie. Yet in the early morning of Saturday, September 8th, 1934, this was actually the scene that spectators watched in horror. The ship was the SS Morro Castle. She was a cruise ship that brought passengers from New York to Havana, Cuba, along with her sister ship, the SS Orient. The charred and twisted remains of the ship, still smoking that morning, was a reminder that disasters at sea involving ocean liners was still very much a possibility. The SS Morro Castle would come to be known as New Jersey's Titanic. Hundreds of thousands of people would jam into Ashbury Park to see the mammoth ocean liner beached and smoldering. The SS Morro Castle was owned by the Ward Line. Its official title was the New York and Cuba Mail Steamship Company. This shipping company operated from 1840 to 1954. At the time, the Congressional Act would help the Ward Line build 2 new passenger ships. The ship was designed by Theodore Forrest, who actually designed the SS Orient as well. Safety was a priority in designing the ship and included the state-of-the-art safety equipment, including fire detection and prevention systems. Remembering the tragedy that befell the Titanic 22 years earlier, the Morro Castle was equipped with enough life-saving equipment to save 1,900 people. This was way more than the ship would actually carry. This included 12 lifeboats capable of carrying 800 people. There were also life buoys, life rafts, as well as 800 life preservers. At an estimated cost of $5 million, the Morro Castle's keel would be laid down in January of 1929 by the Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Virginia. She would be launched on March 5, 1930. She was 508 feet long and weighed 11,250 gross tons. She was propelled by twin General Electric turbine engines, which generated 14,000 horsepower. She had a top speed of 20 knots. Her capacity would be 489 passengers and 240 crew members. The Morro Castle would be commanded by Captain Robert Wilmot. On August 23, 1930, the SS Morro Castle made her maiden voyage to Cuba. She made an estimated 1,150-mile trip in just under 59 hours. Her voyage from Cuba to New York would then be made in 58 hours. The SS Morro Castle and her sister ship, the SS Orient, would provide getaway vacations to Havana, Cuba. These would range from 6.5 days to as many as 14 days. The price range would be from $65 up to $115, not including extras. Her home port would be at the Pier 13 in New York. The success of the Morro Castle and the Orient was due in part to the United States prohibition laws. Once out in international waters, approximately 3.5 miles from shore, drinking and the serving of alcohol was possible aboard ship. Unfortunately, the SS Morro Castle's lifespan would only be 4 years. Unfortunately, Captain Robert Wilmot was not known for his practicing safety drills or placing a high priority on them. There may be a reason for this. Considered a state-of-the-art ship with all the fire safety precautions available at the time, it may have been a lawsuit that may have led to the reduction in fire safety drills. Water had leaked from one of the fire hydrants used in a fire drill exercise. This caused the deck to become wet and slippery. As a result, the woman had slipped and fell, injuring her ankle. As a result of this, she would sue the company. The Ward Line would settle with the woman for $25,000, a considerable sum, especially back then. In fact, Captain Wilmot would actually turn off the fire detection system on a voyage back from Havana, Cuba. This may have been due to the fact that on the return voyage from Cuba, the Morro Castle was carrying salted leather hides, which produced a very unpleasant odor. It may have been because of this that the system was turned off, preventing the airflow which carried the odors throughout the ship. The ship also had no fire detection devices in the public rooms, which added to the problems. On her return trip from Havana, Cuba, it is estimated that the Morro Castle had over 600 people aboard. A tradition on the last night before returning to New York, there was like a party atmosphere, a type of celebration before returning home and going back to normal life. It was on the night of this that Captain Robert Wilmot seemingly suffered a heart attack and would pass away. The circumstances were very suspicious, and with a lack of evidence, foul play could not be proven. The passengers were told that the captain had died of indigestion. Immediately following the news of the captain's death, First Officer William Warnes would assume command of the ship. To make matters worse, the ship would also be subject to a storm of almost hurricane strength. This storm produced 40-foot waves, which made navigating the ship that much more difficult. Taking over as first officer will be the chief engineer, Ibn Abbott. Regarded as a coward by many, Abbott would lower a lifeboat and desert the ship. Approximately 8 people left on the lifeboat at the time and were observed. As if Captain Warnes didn't have enough to worry about, the crew also had a pyromaniac and a psychopath aboard named George White Rogers, who at the time was the #1 radio operator. The radio position were manned by 3 men, 8 hours each, and were outsourced by the ward line. No background checks were done on these positions. Had they been done, they would have discovered that Rogers had a history of pyromania as well as assault. Rogers was not liked by his fellow crew members and was actually told that he would be relieved of his duties upon arrival back to New York. In fact, he neglected to send out an SOS until 38 minutes after the fire had been discovered. In a public room, which was designated a library and a writing room, there would be a locker just next door, which would be hidden by bookshelves. This area was only accessible by the crew. It is in here that the fire had originally started. Being made primarily of wood, the fire was able to spread through the rooms and rapidly grow throughout the ship. This was aided by the many layers of oil-based paint which covered the ship's interior. Acting Captain Warnes would elect to steer the ship bow first into the hurricane-force storm, head-on, which only would fan the flames and spread the fire more quickly. The crew did attempt to fight the fire, but was hampered by a constant lack of water pressure in the system. The pressure would totally disappear once the ship's engines would stop working. The fire within the ship would be so intense that fleeing passengers on deck had their shoes melt and catch fire, and would be forced to jump overboard. Seeing the lights off the shoreline in the distance gave them hope that they could swim to safety. 67 people would be saved by a local fisherman using his vessel called the Paramount. When lifeboats were lowered, many of the occupants were in fact crew members. This led many of the passengers to be on their own and to fend for themselves. This was noticed by those on shore providing aid to the survivors. Many of the crew members would tear their insignias off their uniforms due to the shame of what they had done. It was also very noticeable that many of the lifeboats were charred and still hung from the davits aboard the ship. The SS Morro Castle was initially attached to a tow line, which would tow the ship back to New York City. It is when the tow line snapped that the ship drifted ashore. When the ship beached itself on September 8, 1934, a high line was used to evacuate the remaining passengers and allow the firefighters to totally put out the fire. Several bodies would eventually wash up on the shores of Monmouth County, and the spectacle would draw huge crowds, which were informed by a radio station, WCAP, which at that time would broadcast from inside the convention hall. Signs were also put up showing the way on how to get to the ship. Drawing hundreds of thousands of people, an idea arose to keep the ship there as a tourist attraction. However, this idea was abandoned when what was left on the ship became decomposed and produced an awful stench that permeated the area. Due to this tragedy, it was ruled that an SOS must be transmitted immediately. It was also ruled that ships be built using less wooden materials and less paint. Mandatory life-saving drills were also initiated, including fire drills. An estimated total of 137 people lost their lives in that tragedy. It is also worth noting that not all of the bodies were ever recovered.